Pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Erasmo Trentin, currently a postdoc researcher at INAF Astronomical Observatory of Naples, Capodimonte. His research focuses on classical Cepheids, combining high-resolution spectroscopy and multi-wavelength observations to study stellar parameters, chemical abundances, and the structure of the Milky Way disk. Today, we will present a talk entitled C-MetaLL Project, High-Resolution Spectroscopy of Classical Cepheids as Tracers of the Milky Way Disk. The C-MetaLL project is an international collaboration aimed at investigating the metallicity dependence of Cepheid period-luminosity relations and Cepheid period-luminosity metallicity relations through homogeneous spectroscopy analysis. Erasmo will be, I'm sure, more detail about this. Dear Erasmo, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot. I'm gonna share now my screen. So, thank you, Julia. Thank you, Fatime, for inviting me to allowing me to give this talk. As Julia already said, I'm Erasmo Trentin. I'm working at the Astronomical Observatory of Capodimonte, and today I'm gonna talk to you about a branch of the C-MetaLL project. In particular, we'll focus on the role of classical Cepheids as tracers of the Milky Way disk and the use we can have with the high resolution spectroscopy. So, first of all, can see my screen changing, right? Yes, okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so how to reduce more than 100 history of classical Cepheids in just 3 words? What's important to know for this talk, for what I'm gonna talk about, is that essentially they are young stars, intermediate mass young stars in their central helium burning phase. They're bright, so it means that they are relatively easy to observe. As you can see in this HR diagram, I guess most of us has already seen the several times this diagram. Delta Cepheids are located among the brightest stellar object that we can observe. So I would say that one of the reason they're one of the most important astronomical object in all astrophysics is that they are pulsating variables. They pulsate with periods between 1 day, even less actually, and up to 70 days more or less. And they're famous for the period luminosity relation, which means that if you have a calibration of this relation and you can estimate the period, then you can compare the luminosity with the magnitudes and estimate distances. This around at almost 20 years ago, even more, it brought the idea to build a sort of ladder that would allow you to calibrate the PL relation of the Cepheids using geometry distances, then go further to uh, farthest galaxies where both Cepheids and supernova type 1a are located, calibrate that distance as well, and then you push even farther, taking advantage of the supernova type 1a till the Hubble flow. In this way, you can build a cosmic distance ladder that will allow you to estimate one of the most important parameters in astrophysics, which is the Hubble constant. From this topic, you can understand how important it has to be to calibrate with the extreme precision the period luminosity relation. And here comes the metallicity role, since from the theory we know that the metallicity has an influence on the calibration of these relations, and that's how the C-MetaLL project is born. This project that saved my PhD, born in around 2019, has the main o- has a main objective the idea of studying the dependence of the period luminosity relation on the metallicity using classical Cepheids located in the Milky Way disk, taking advantage of the well-known radial metallicity gradient. The idea is to enlarge the sample of classical Cepheids around 300 objects and at the same time to enlarge the range of metallicity that we have. So, of course, if we focus or we go randomly in observing the Milky Way, the Cepheids in the Milky Way, we will mostly find high metallicity Cepheids. But what we know is to push towards the outskirts of the Milky Way, where supposedly we should find low metallicity Cepheids. Of course, since we are talking about calibration of the PL relation, we would also need the photometry and trying to have as many bands as possible to calibrate as many relations as possible. In this talk, I'm not going to focus on the calibration itself, I'm going to focus on the spectroscopy part. So the spectroscopic sample that we published, it's been published over several years. We had several releases. We started in 2021 with the first paper with 50 stars observed at the TNG with the ARPS instrument. Then, in a second paper, we reached more than 100 stars published. The bulk of the stars has been published in C-Metal 6 in the sixth paper by this guy, Trentin, that maybe you know. And as you can see here, we used several instruments that are all very high metallicity with a very high resolution. UVES with 47,000, Espadons 81, ARPS it reached more than 100,000 of resolution. And then just recently has been accepted the eighth paper of this project, always by Trentin, where we published other 50 stars, more or less, reaching, and we reached a total of 340 individual classical cepheids. The signal to noise on average is around 80, so they're very high signal to noise spectra. And we estimated up to 33 chemical species. Of course, as I already mentioned before, we know that in the Milky Way there is a radial metallicity gradient. So here I'm going to briefly talk about the main results that we reached. As you can see from this plot, on the x-axis we have the galactocentric distance, and on the y-axis the metallicity. As you can see, over the years we managed to not only have an almost homogeneous distribution in both the distances from around 4 up to 20, with even one star at more than 24, but even in from the metallicity point of view, we have an almost homogeneous distribution that spans more than one dex, around 1.5 dex. From the periods, we also have some a very big range. We go from 0.4 up to 70 days, and actually in the latest published papers, most of the stars have periods above 50 days, which are quite rare for classical cepheids. So we're trying to expand also from that point of view, since it will be crucial for the calibration of the period luminosity relation. But here arrives the funny part that, as I said, they're very important as tracers of the Milky Way disk. So if we look at the polar distribution in this figure, I overimposed the spiral arms model by Reed and collaborators in 2019. We see how a lot of stars in the outskirts, they seem to trace more than one spiral arm. But what I recently did was also to compare with other models. Unfortunately, as we all know, it's quite difficult to estimate or to study the formation, the structure of an entire apartment if you're inside a room. And for us, it's the same. We are inside the Milky Way, so it's quite difficult to understand the spiral structure of our galaxy. So there are, over the years, here I collected the main spiral models that have been collected in the spiral map tool. In 20 years of research, we had several models that can differentiate quite a lot. I would like for you to notice, for example, how in Levin and collaborators 2006, or in the recent paper last year by Dremel and collaborators that used classical Cepheids to constrain the spiral arms, the most external stars, they nicely trace the Perseus arm, so not the Norma or the OSC arm. For the most internal ones, so the Scutum, the Norma, the Perseus, no, the Perseus, sorry, the Sagittarius and the Carina arm, there are quite an agreement among all the models, so these internal red, blue, and magenta spirals. But as soon as we go to the black arm, so the Perseus, then we go for the Norma or the association of the Scutum Centarum and the outer plus arm, called also OSC. Here we find real clear differences. Other models, just like Sun and collaborators or Wuhan using H2 regions, they go back agreeing with what I already said for for Reed, where our stars seem to trace the outer arm, but there's also another models always by Wuhan in 2014, where using three different tracers, the structure of the OSC arm change drastically. So for now, the structure of the Milky Way is still an open debate. But as I said, we managed to estimate up to 33 different chemical species. So of course, there is a possibility to study the radial gradient for all the other elements. In general, just as a briefly description, you can see how for going from lighter elements towards heavier elements, we have clear negative slopes that become shallower already at the barium, the lanthanum, until they become essentially null or in some cases even positive. You don't have to worry. I'm not gonna talk about all 33 elements. I'm just gonna focus on half of them, which are the so-called neutron capture elements. First, a little shout out for something that that we published this year, is that in the latest release we even managed to estimate four new elements which are among the heaviest elements that we can that we can estimate. We have the dysprosium, the erbium, the lutetium, and the thorium. In particular, the thorium will almost at the limit of the natural elements that can be formed in nature. And what I would like to focus on is the origin of the neutron capture elements. Historically, they've been divided in two different processes. One is the slow and one is the rapid. The difference comes from the rate at which the atom or an element capture the neutrons compared with the time scale of the radioactive decay. So depending on the flux of neutron and the time scale of the beta decay, you can have either a slow process or an hard process. But in theory, the process itself it's the same, which is the capture of neutron. The problem arrives that when you have to compare the events that allow to have either a slow or a rapid process. In particular, for the slow process, this is quite well documented. The process are well known. We have for the lighter elements from iron to the strontium, we can have either massive stars for solar metallicities, or on the other side, for low metallicity stars, in case of high rotational rates, then we can have the so-called weak slow process. But the most famous and the most important one that pushes the elements up to lead is the low mass AGB stars. In particular, I would like to for you to suggest this nice review of Cescuti and Matteucci in 2022. It's a little review on an historical development of the models where comparing the models with observation, researchers were pushed to think of a slow process, then of an R process, then maybe of a secondary S or R processes, coming essentially to a sort of an agreement for the slow process. On the other side, for the R processes, their physical nature is still under debate. When researchers they realized that slow process was not enough to have the heaviest natural elements over lead, and that even for elements between barium and lead, the models didn't manage to match the observation estimations. Several processes have been suggested, starting from the electron capture supernovae, the hypernovae, the neutrino-driven winds associated with core collapse supernovae. Recently, great popularity comes from the neutron star mergers and also the black hole mergers with the event which was recently confirmed by the gravitational wave detector. And last but not least, the magnetorotational supernova. As you will see soon, all these processes can contribute differently from element to element. But one important thing is that it's since they're from all these processes come from the same nature, which is the neutron capture. It's really important to have a way to differentiate between those elements that have been formed mostly by S processes and those from R processes. In particular, in the Sun, the 98% of europium, the 82% of gadolinium, and the 88% of dysprosium have been are produced solely by our processes. So as you can see, there is some way, if you manage to estimate the right elements, to have to study the different nature of the slow and the hard process. So, for someone who would like to understand the origin and the several uh, astrophysical events that can produce this all these elements, I would suggest would for me the Rosetta Stone of the origin of the elements, which is the famous paper in 2020 by Kobayashi, Karax, and Lugaro. In this picture that would require an entire seminar by on its own to describe all of it, you can see for each element what's the contribution of the several formation channels. You start from the Big Bang nucleosynthesis, so the hydrogen, helium, and lithium. And then you have several contributions. As I said, the AGB stars, the asymptotic giant branch stars, are in green. The core collapse supernova are in blue, and they collect also all the other processes that I described. So hypernova, neutrino-driven winds, magnetorotational supernova, and so on. Type 1a supernova, they are famous to contribute for the iron peak elements, so from titanium more or less to nickel. And then the neutron star mergers that also included the black hole mergers. As you can see, barium elements like barium, lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, neodymium, they are optimal to study the S process, the slow process, since most of the contribution comes from the asymptotic giant branch, but it's way more difficult for the R processes, and even in the case of europium, gadolinium, the erbium that, as I said, we recently found in classical Cepheids or the dysprosium, the lutetium, all the elements that are here in the lowest part. It's non-negligible the contribution of the slow process, and but still they are the elements that have mostly of their they are mostly produced by our processes. If we go more in detail in the models of Kobayashi and collaborators papers, we can see that for the whole neutron capture elements, they studied the several possible formation channels, starting from the blue lines that also in this picture we have the dependence of each element from iron, or from another point of view is the evolution of each element as the iron goes up and up. And all the plots are models that cumulative add more contribution. So we start from a purely as process in blue, and then towards lighter colors, we have the contribution of the electron capture supernovae, the neutron star merger, the black hole mergers, and in the end, the magnetorotational ones. As you can see, for some elements like molybdenum, palladium, rutetium, the neutrino-driven elements, the neutrino winds contribution actually overestimate the elements. So in most cases, it has to be neglected or ignored. But in other cases, what gives most of the contribution and eventually also a match on between the model and the observation is the magnetorotational supernova. But what I wanted you to focus on about is that if we focus on some of the most famous RS process, so lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, but even for the R process, so dysprosium, lutetium, the gadolinium as well, you can all notice how, at least up to 2020, there is a serious lack of observational counterpart in high metallicity tail, while for the low metallicity, in this sense, I'm talking of low metallicity below -2. Uh, there are several papers that I try to scram around them and check what kind of stars they are. They are mostly FGK mean sequence stars, so they're metal poor and old stars. But at least in this plot, there is a lack on the high metallicity tail and conversely of young stars. So what I tried to do for the last paper that has been published in the C-MetaLL project was to check for other estimation of the abundances element. Some of them, like gadolinium and europium, so more or less the same names that I'm saying over and over. Uh, for gadolinium and europium, you actually have tons of papers that cannot be listed in a single slide, and they've been estimated at all ages, at all metallicities. But for some of those elements, like lutetium, dysprosium, or thorium, that can be relevant for the study and join the team of europium and gadolinium for the study of our process elements. Again, there is a lack of either high metallicity stars or of young stars. For example, the Ambre project that started in 2013 by De La Verni, and there have been several releases, among which Guillon 2018, Michelin in 2022, and there are even more in the references. they analyzed FGK dwarf stars, main sequence stars. So in that case, you cannot really check which is the age of the stars. You know for sure that they go over a broad range. The R Process Alliance started by Hansen and collaborators in 2018. It's a project that focuses exactly on the study of enhanced or R enhanced stars. And in most cases, we have again metal pulsars with the metallicity way below -1 dex. Other kind of exotic, a bit more exotic stars are red giant stars with strong magnetic fields by Lyubimov, 2022 A and B. More than 20 of these stars have been analyzed, but again, we are working with either low metallicity stars or old stars or a combination of the two. Then there are other several studies for metal pulse stars, Sara, Flynn, etc., etc. One shout out has to be done for Kovchuk that analyzed the classical Cepheid in 2023. This classical Cepheid was already included in our sample, but he uh, created a list of spectral lines that can be used for the analysis, for the hunting of some of these elements, also more exotic elements. So up to now, I think it's quite clear of the role of the classical Cepheids as a powerful tool. Unfortunately, for the role of WST, I couldn't manage to have a more quantitative examples. I had some difficulties in downloading the ATC, so I apologize for that. But just by this talk and the role of classical Cepheids on their own, it's quite obvious what it's going to be their role joining the, the, the the tool that WST is going to give us. So, of course, just from the structure and the constraint and the characterization of the Milky Way disk, a lot can be done. More region can be explored, and WST will allow to explore more regions of the Milky Way disk. Conversely, with the number of the elements that we can estimate with classical Cepheids, we can study not only the structure of the Milky Way disk, but also the chemical evolution, the recent chemical evolution history of the Milky Way disk or of a particular Milky Way spiral arm. In the context of the C-MetaLL project, as I said, we already published a big amount of stars, up to 33 chemical different species. We already reached a quite robust sample and dataset in both the distance and the metallicity, and we are also working to extend the period range that we have. So when we will be able to combine WST with the catalog that Gaia already have published or LSST in the near future, it's going to be easy to hunt stars that or classical surface that we want to analyze, either because they're interesting because in some region of the Milky Way, or because we know from the literature that they have maybe have a particular chemical estimation. And with the high resolution mode, which is 40,000, for sure we're going to be able to estimate a lot of chemical species, among which the us and the R process. So I will say that this is the end, this is the conclusion. So I thank you all, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I will answer to the best of my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erasmo, for talking about your work with us. It's time for questions or comments. So please raise your hand or type in the chat. Fatemi?
Yeah, so I have a number of questions, but then I will go like one by one. So WC also has this big feature of giving you time resolve the spectra. So I was wondering if that would be any help to your research, or is that like something that you only need like a snapshots? And then there is also this feature of going like much deeper in magnitude, so like much further down the Gaia catalogs, even like
Hmm.
DR4, like from what I know.
Yes, yes.
And
Yeah.
then I was wondering if that would be helping you with characterizing populations of FGK type stars, at least. Like, how do you envision this happening in your research?
Okay, so starting from the first question, it's going to be really important to have the possibility to study in a time domain aspect the spectra, so to study the evolution of the stellar spectrum. Up to now, we can do it with the magnitude to study the light curves, but of course, with WSC, we will be able to do that to analyze also how the stellar spectrum change. It's going to be more relevant for sure for the atmospheric parameters, that it's the first step of the spectroscopic analysis, since in theory we expect the elements to not change their abundances over their whole phase, but for others kind of stars is actually going to be very relevant to maybe to study how the abundances can change over the evolution if there is some extreme event going on. So for the study of the atmospheric parameters, yes, it's going to be crucial. For the abundance estimation on its own, I will say that it's going to be a powerful statistical model to reach errors way below the ones that are available right now. So more or less, we are talking about zero point 0.1 dex. With WST, probably we will be able to go way below that. Just by brute statistic force of having so many spectra of the same star where we can estimate the same elements. For the second one, the second question was about the magnitude. So yeah, of course, Gaia and the catalog that we have and we're gonna have with the further data releases, we will have a good starting point for starting to study the classical Cepheids with WST. So we're gonna have a catalog of thousands of stars, but WST is going probably to help to increase of around one order of magnitude the number of stars available. And WST is also going to help not only in identification but also in the study and classification of classical Cepheids on their own. We know that, for example, for Cepheids in general, we already divided in type 2 anomalous and classical Cepheids. Probably they're going to be really important, for example, in the study of the differences between the fundamental mode classical Cepheids and first overtone classical Cepheids, since we will have a huge tool also from the time domain. And the third questions, I forgot about. What was it? Sorry.
Like there was not a third one, but then I can go ahead and ask the third one. So you had
Okay.
this a slide which was about accumulating time on different telescopes. I think it was slide 3, which you requested for time. So I was thinking because WST will have like 30,000 fibers and then it will look over a very large area of the sky, like simultaneously. Would this kind of ease the burden on the shoulder of other telescopes that you're like showing here? I mean, of course, like the spectrum, like the resolving power here is like very different. So like US has something around like 40,000, while Harpsnor, for
Yeah.
example, has like 150 K, like let's say like in resolving power. So the spectrum is like quite wide, like resolving
Mhm.
power wise. But I was
My
thinking like if
yeah.
instruments like this, which are like scanning the skies like from a spectral point of view, would be like also facilitating I mean, like the time that is like accumulating on all of these, like I mean, programs, etc.,
Mhm.
and then like basically just transferring it to one facility that homogeneously
Yeah.
is observing your samples. Or no, like you will
No,
have
no,
to
no.
anyways ask for more time from other facilities still.
So no, I agree with you. Of course, it's gonna be a big improvement. I will say that right now the role of WST is going to be more or less the same as we have right now when we have to differentiate between the low resolution and high resolution. While for low resolution, it's usually enough for studies like the radial velocities. For WST, it's going to be the same when we want to differentiate between a very focused study on the elements. So we want to estimate as many elements as possible for a strict confined number of stars, and where we're gonna need higher resolution than the one that WST will give us. And as you can see here, yes, we are already using instruments like harps with 115 as a resolution. So for some elements, like the erbium or the thorium, that they are way more difficult um, to find and to estimate. Probably WST will not reach the requirements, but with 40,000, you can still span a big range of elements, going from the elements from the CNO cycle to the iron peak to the neutron capture. So you're still gonna have the whole set of elements. If you want to go specific on some elements or some spectral lines that it's usually more difficult to find in classical Cepheids, then yes, you will still have to rely on singular instrument.
Okay, so it also like depends a lot on which abundances you're studying, because I think like the role of like harp's node, for example, is not gonna be like removed anyways, because you're
Hmm.
asking for like very large,
Yeah.
let's say, set of data. So yeah, okay, so like partly like it can cover your science, but it's not going to meet all of your requirements, like from what I see.
Mhm. But of course, if you have seen also from this from this plot, for some elements we have a serious lack of available elements, and I'm sure that for some of them uh, WST is going to contribute and open up the windows maybe to new kind of models and new comparison between what we can obtain from the model and the observation. Just an
Like
example,
literally, like
you.
what I'm seeing, like the contribution of WST would be is to do the spectroscopy for the targets that people find with LSST. So I think like it's going to be like a part to that instrument mostly, because I mean
Mhm,
with Gaia like we're also like not complete like magnitude wise, like up to like Gmag 20, while like I mean LSST will give us like everything that is like much fainter, and they're gonna be both like ground-based
mhm.
facilities, etc. So I see synergy there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. I mean, okay, thank you so much. I feel like that was all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Okay, maybe I think that we can close the session here. Thank you, Erasmus, again for your time and sharing your work with us. Our next speaker
Thanks
will
a lot.
be Valentina Dorazzi on February 3rd. We hope to see you all there. Have a great day, everyone, and goodbye. Bye bye.